Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Hall, and welcome to the April 20th, 2026 Interagency Transportation Equity Advisory Community Engagement Policies and Practices Subcommittee meeting. This subcommittee's focus will be on elevating diverse and historically marginalized voices and will advise the California Transportation Commission, California State Transportation Agency, and California Department of Transportation on how to achieve meaningful outcomes in transportation equity, environmental justice, and equitable economic opportunities, especially as related to transportation planning and programming. The meeting agenda is located on the Commission's website at www.catc.ca.gov. Any document created for the subcommittee can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at transportationeac@dot.ca.gov, and we'll have them returned to you as quickly as possible. American Sign Language interpretation is being provided for this meeting. You should see them on your screen. Spanish interpretation is also being provided. You can access this service through the Interpretation tab at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A tab if you have questions about this. Live closed captioning is also available. Select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There's a number of language options there to choose from. Speakers, for accessibility purposes, we ask that you please state your name prior to speaking. Committee members, all members attending remotely must visibly appear on camera unless you're unable to do so due to connectivity issues. If that's the case, please announce the technical reason for not appearing on camera. Presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, do your best to be succinct. Remember to speak at a steady pace to allow our interpreting services adequate time for accurate interpretation. Members of the public, you're welcome comments from the public as a part of each item at this meeting. You should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you'll find the raise hand and Q&A buttons. Use the hand raise feature as soon as we reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Committee staff will let you know when it's your turn to comment. Alternately, you may use the Q&A tab to submit a written comment. Committee staff will read the comment on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and number to access the webinar, and they should not be shared with other participants, as this can create confusion when making comments. Again, do your best to be concise and speak at a steady pace to allow our interpreting services adequate time for accurate interpretation. We ask you to make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on any single topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute if needed. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Clerk. We'll now move into the land acknowledgement. I can go ahead and share my screen for that. Would any member like to read the land acknowledgement?
This is member Martha Armis Kelly. We acknowledge that the land we now call California is the ancestral land over 109 nations, tribes, and peoples. The indigenous peoples of this area have a deep and reciprocal relationship with the land and its original stewards. Their ways, their methods, and traditions have impacted California's rich biodiversity and have impacted the transportation network for its committed partnership in advocating for a more equitable and sustainable future. Our transportation network not only connects us to families, friends, and work, but it also gives us leisure. It connects us to our past, our future. We embrace our past with future commitment to inclusiveness and equity for everyone who calls this state home. And I apologize that my screen is not on, but I am inside of an office that's very bad reception, and I can't really open up the screen, so I was grateful that I could read that. And I acknowledge the Miwok and the Yokuts territories in which I reside on.
Thank you, Member Armis Kelly. Would any other members like to acknowledge the land that they're joining from? Member Wong?
The city and county of San Francisco recognizes the land as the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples.
Thank you, Member Wong. Any other members? Okay, seeing none, I can go ahead and move us into our next item. If we have quorum, I see Randy joined, so we should have quorum to vote for chair. Is that correct, clerk?
Yes, correct. We have reached quorum and are able to take action on the vote.
Okay, great. So now move us into election of the subcommittee chair. At this point, do we have any nominations?
Hi, Member Armis Kelly. I'm making a nomination for myself for the position of chair for community engagement.
Okay, great. Any other nominations? Do we have, before we take a second, Martha, would you like to provide any remarks?
Surely, my work on the EAC has been primarily as a member, and then I went on to a vice chair and to a chair. And each time I have been very cognizant of the role of community engagement, especially understanding the relationship between institutions, community, and academia. I am part of the NorCal Environmental Justice group that is actually making those connections for our state. And now we have a Southern chapter as well. It's been a privilege to be able to serve on the Equity Advisory Committee, and I feel that I have a deep connection with community and the real, I guess, tangible outcomes that we need to have in community engagement, not only in our own spaces, but also through the institution and the work that is being conveyed. So I have a strong background in RFPs and understanding how sometimes contracts they want to have that intention, but we want to look at more of a robust, not just checking the box um, method. And I think that right now with SB1 coming into purview and some of the other community engagement opportunities, I feel that I will be able to lead our team into um, positive outcomes for that success. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Member Armors Kelly. Do we have a second to Martha's nomination for chair or subcommittee chair?
This is Andres Ramirez. I second that.
Okay, thank you, Member Ramirez. We can now go into roll call vote. Clerk, would you like to take us through that?
Yes, will do. Gary Kimi Hernandez, Lisa Marie Alvarado, Martha Armis Kelly,
Aye.
Anthony Giddens, Gloria Huerta, Andres Ramirez,
Aye.
Michelle Rossi,
Aye.
Randy Torres Van Vleck,
Aye.
Pualani Vasquez, I didn't hear that. Pualani Vasquez?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Howard Wong,
Aye.
the motion passes.
Thank
Hey.
you, everyone.
Congratulations, Subcommittee Chair. So we'll now move into public comment on items not on the agenda. While we do that, Carolyn is going to email you the facilitation guide for the rest of the meeting. Are you in a space where you're able to facilitate the meeting, or is that something that you would like me to continue doing?
If you could continue, that would be great. Thank you. I appreciate that for this meeting.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so at this point, we'll take public comments on items not on the agenda.
At this time, I'm not seeing any request to comment on the item.
Okay, we'll now move into our next item, which is adoption of November 2025 and January 2026 meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to adopt the November 2025 and January 2026 meeting minutes.
I make a motion, Michelle Rousey, to approve the minutes from December 2025 and January 2026.
Okay, thank you, Member Rousey. Do we have a second?
This is Pulani Vasquez. I second.
Okay, thank you, Member Vasquez. We'll now go into roll call vote.
Carrie Kimi Hernandez. Lisa Marie Alvarado. Martha Armas Kelly.
Aye.
Anthony Giddens. Gloria Huerta. Andres Ramirez.
Aye.
Michelle Rousey.
Aye.
Randy Torres Van Vleck.
Aye.
Pualani Vasquez.
Aye.
Howard Wong.
Aye.
Chair, the motion passes.
Okay, great. Our next item is going to be Senate Bill 1, Cycle 5 Guidelines and Equity Supplement, and that is going to be presented by Beverly Newman Burkhardt, who's the CTC Trade Corridor Enhancement Program Manager. Beverly, do you want to take it away?
Yes, thanks, Camille. Hi, everyone. I'm going to pull up my slides really fast. Um, I think you may have to. I just sent a request to be able to share.
Okay, should be good to go.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Screen 2. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today on your subcommittee meeting. I'm Beverly Newman Burkhardt. I use she, her pronouns, and I am presenting to you today from Nisenan land. I manage the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program at the Commission, and for this cycle of the Senate Bill 1 programs, I'm also coordinating our efforts to update our considerations of equity and community engagement in all 3 competitive Senate Bill 1 programs. So that includes the Local Partnership Program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. And then Matthew Yazgat, our Deputy Director on the Senate Bill 1 team, is also on today's meeting. Okay, in terms of what I'm going to discuss today and what I'm hoping to discuss with this group, so I'm going to do a very brief kind of refresher on the Senate Bill 1 programs and our guidelines development process. And then I'll also talk about some of our efforts to update our considerations of equity and community engagement this cycle. And then we'll go into the main focus of today, which is discussing our community engagement evaluation criteria and the Senate Bill 1 Transportation Equity Supplement. And for those 2 items, I'll have like a short kind of presentation on the items or the language that we currently have in there. And then that's when I would love to hear from this group on any suggestions you have on like ways that we can strengthen our consideration of equity and community engagement or kind of add more resources for our applicants. All right. So as I mentioned, I wanted to give just kind of a brief overview of our guidelines development process and the 3 competitive Senate Bill 1 programs. We don't have much time today, so I'm not going to go into too much depth on any of the programs. However, these slides were shared with the group, I think, on Friday, and there's links to all of the program web pages in the slides that you can kind of go to those websites to learn more. And you can also always reach out to any of the program managers if you want to kind of meet with one of us and chat more about the program. So As I mentioned, the three competitive Senate Bill 1 programs include the Local Partnership Program, or you may hear me refer to it as LPP, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, which you may hear me refer to as SCCP, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, or TCEP. So we're currently developing guidelines for the fifth cycle of each of these programs. We develop our guidelines through a public process where we hold public guidelines development workshops, which I know a few of you have attended those in the past. We collaborate with a broad range of partners to develop our guidelines, so Caltrans, local agencies, regional agencies, advocacy groups, community-based organizations, and our Equity Advisory Committee. And our program guidelines must be consistent with each program's respective statute. So to develop our Cycle 5 guidelines, we've been holding workshops over the last few months to solicit feedback on proposed policies. And we've also been providing virtual office hours, which are our technical assistance meetings with potential applicants to discuss their projects. So overall, program guidelines govern program development and implementation. So they provide the process by which we select projects for funding, the criteria we use to select those projects and to evaluate those projects, and the policies that successful projects must comply with after funds are awarded. Additionally, they also provide resources for applicants. So one of the resources that you'll hear about today is our Senate Bill 1 Transportation Equity Supplement. All right, so again, I really want this discussion to be focused on kind of ideas you have today. So I'm going to keep these program overviews really short, but I just wanted to give everyone a quick refresher on these programs. So the Local Partnership Program. So this is the first program I'll highlight. The program manager for this program is Lashara Ward. And so if you ever have any questions, you should reach out to Lashara. She's a great resource. The Local Partnership Program provides funding to counties, cities, districts, and regional transportation agencies that have voter-approved or locally imposed fees and taxes dedicated to transportation improvements. So basically, they're using their locally imposed transportation fee or tax to kind of match state funds to get money for projects. The program has $200 million in funding per year. And that's distributed through 40% goes to the competitive program, and then 60% goes to a formulaic program. So there's two pieces of LPP, which is the competitive and the formulaic programs. The next program I'll highlight is the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, and this program funds projects that reduce congestion on heavily traveled corridors. Naveen Habib is the manager of this program, so definitely reach out to her if you ever have any questions. This program receives $250 million per year. Eligible applicants include regional transportation planning agencies, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans. Eligible projects include projects that support the state's climate goals, manage congestion through innovative and multimodal strategies, advance transportation equity, and promote clean transportation. And the third program is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. So this program funds public freight infrastructure improvements along corridors that have high freight volumes. I'm the manager of this program, so you can always reach out to me if you ever have any questions or if you want to chat more about the program. The program receives approximately $400 million per year, and we say approximately because unlike the other programs, this program is based on diesel excise tax revenues. So we get a kind of percentage of those revenues as part of the program funding. And it also receives federal funds from the Federal National Highway Freight Program. And this program statutorily 40% of the funds go to programs that are nominated by projects that are nominated by Caltrans, and 60% are for projects nominated by local or regional agencies. And for the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, all projects must have a freight benefit. So we fund port, rail, highway, and border improvements, as well as zero emission freight infrastructure. And we also fund project elements that mitigate the negative impacts of the freight project being proposed. Oh, there we go. Okay, and then just quickly in terms of our timeline for cycle 5, so we have been holding workshops since November and we'll continue to hold them through early May. At the June commission meeting, we'll present draft guidelines to the commission, and in August, we'll present our final guidelines to the commission for adoption. And then once those guidelines are approved, the call for projects will be released. And applicants will have until it's probably just about before Thanksgiving to submit their applications. Then we'll go into the evaluation period for the projects, and that's when we'll be kind of reaching back out to the EAC to look for members who are interested in evaluating projects. So members of the EAC serve as our evaluators for the community engagement evaluation criteria. This cycle will include 2 fiscal years of funding for each program. Okay. Also, if any members have questions as I go along, when we get to the more discussion portion of my presentation, which is soon, I promise, I'll be pausing more frequently, but honestly, if anyone has questions, you can go ahead and interrupt me or raise your hand, whatever works best for you. Okay, so I also, before we go over kind of the materials that we wanted your input on, I wanted to give you some more context on our efforts to update our equity and community engagement considerations this cycle. So we have 3 concurrent efforts to update our policies and our resources related to equity and community engagement. So first is we have a group of 4 subject matter experts from the EAC who are reviewing these documents and providing in-depth feedback and ideas. And I know a few of you are on this meeting right now. We're also doing this presentation today. So we wanted to engage a larger subset of the EAC to get some additional input and any high-level feedback. And then we also held a public workshop last week to get feedback and input and ideas from our larger group of program stakeholders. The presentation from that workshop is available on our website now, and the recording should be available soon. It usually takes us about a week to get that sorted out. And as a reminder, so as we go through all the materials today, any changes that we're discussing, and all of the current materials are integrated through all 3 of the programs. So the Local Partnership Program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. So basically, in terms of our considerations, we kind of replicate it across all 3 programs. And then this is just kind of what we're asking for today. Oh, Michelle, yes.
Yeah, can you send that to us when you get that in via email? The one that you had from the previous that you had last week with people. That way, when you get it, we just get it.
Sorry, from the public workshop or?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. When you get that, can can at least can I get it so that I can listen to it and hear possibly what the public's wanting also? Because
yeah, of
I worked on
course.
the SB1 stuff last year, so I'm wondering. I want to hear from them their input too. So thank you.
Of course, I can share that with you, and then I can also share it with Camille and Sasha, and then however you want to distribute it to the group works for me. But yeah, Michelle, I'll email that to you directly once it's posted. Okay, so again, we don't have much time today, so um, I, I would love to hear, once we kind of go through all the materials, any insights you have on our current community engagement evaluation criteria and our equity supplement. Any ideas, like initial ideas you have to strengthen and refine existing policy and language. And then any areas you think that we should expand. I think one thing that we always are thinking about is how we can expand our equity supplement to be more useful to our applicants. And you'll see kind of that language momentarily. And as I mentioned, today's discussion is really short, and I know that a few of you are already participating as subject matter experts, but anyone who's not, if you listen to this presentation and we have this discussion today and you have any additional ideas or you want to provide more input, you are very, very welcome to reach out to me and we can find some more time to chat and just about any ideas you have. Okay. So, oh, that's fine. The first topic today for discussion today is our community engagement evaluation criteria. So all projects that are submitted to the Senate Bill 1 programs are evaluated on their ability to create mobility opportunities for Californians, especially Californians from disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. Projects that do well on these evaluation criteria demonstrate meaningful and effective public participation in decision-making processes. So, as I mentioned previously, subject matter experts from our Interagency Equity Advisory Committee serve as evaluators for community engagement for each application. And last cycle, we worked with partners, including subject matter experts from the EAC, to strengthen our community engagement evaluation criteria. And one of the ways we did that was we created 4 sub-criteria to help applicants address equitable project outcomes and meaningful participation. So these include identification, so who the communities are, engagement, so how they were engaged, outcomes, so how feedback helps shape the projects, and impacts, so whether and how any negative impacts on communities were assessed. So I'm going to run through each of these 4 criteria in more detail, and then at the end of that, I'll open it up for any ideas or questions that you all have about the criteria, and we can always backtrack to a previous slide if you want to look at something more closely when we get to that section. Okay, so for identification, applicants are asked to identify the disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities that the project impacts, and to provide a demographic profile and a map. So tools for identifying these communities are outlined in our equity supplement, which we'll discuss a little bit later, kind of what those tools specifically are. Okay, so that's identification. For the engagement sub-criteria, applicants are asked to explain how communities were engaged to address their needs. If there are disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities within the project study area, how did the agency directly engage with them? How community feedback was incorporated into the project, and how the agency informed the community about whether their feedback was incorporated into the project. So as staff, we have a couple new proposed questions under this sub-criteria. And we love your feedback on these, or if you have additional ones that you'd like us to add here. But we're proposing to add as a new question, demonstrate any collaboration with community-based organizations that informed and shaped the project's engagement strategy, including how their input influenced engagement approaches and priorities. And the second proposed new question is, describe any efforts to identify and deliver targeted community benefits. For example, the development of a community benefits agreement, collaboration with community-based organizations, the creation of a community advisory committee, community listening sessions targeted at disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. Okay, so the outcome section. So for the outcome subcriteria, applicants are asked to describe how the project scope was developed with community feedback. They have to answer whether an alternatives analysis was developed to include community feedback. The agency is asked to demonstrate its partnership and collaboration with disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. They're asked to identify any strategies included in the project scope that avoid or minimize impacts on disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. And then as staff, we have a proposed new question here that is, describe how the project will deliver equitable outcomes for disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. And finally, the impacts subcriteria. So for this subcriteria, applicants are asked to discuss how the agency assessed any negative impacts to communities on the basis of race, color, socioeconomic status, gender, sexuality, disability status, or national origin, and if there were any impacts, whether they considered and incorporated alternative options. Okay, so this is where I'd love to open it up to any discussion or ideas from this group. So these were just some topics that I was thinking about that I'd love to get input on, but I'm open to any feedback that the group has. So do these criteria fully capture what meaningful engagement should look like? Are there any major areas or topics that are missing? Are there any sub-questions for identification, engagement, outcomes, or impacts, the sub-criteria that we should consider modifying or adding to better assess the quality and depth of community engagement? And then any other feedback that you have. And I see Pualani has her hand raised.
Beverly, thank you. So, I think one thing that is very common among all the different grants that I evaluate is that we have trouble getting community to these listening sessions, as well as having them fill out evaluations, at the end. And it occurs to me that when we look at doing community outreach, that a lot of times with these grants, especially with the RFPs and the entities that are formed around the RFPs to fulfill the grants, is that the community piece is done kind of as a checkbox, as an afterthought. And it really should be what work are you doing right now in the community before you're even granted this award, before you're even granted the project? How are you demonstrating your work in the community, your relatability? Because when we, especially with the transportation projects that we're having now, there's a bunch of transportation projects that have been put in, and the community, especially the very vocal pieces of the community, have spoken up against the improvements that have been put in, and they've then had to be ripped out and replaced. So I think having community engagement from the get-go, before they even get the grant, is super, super important. And I do think some of the questions that are in here address it, but it's not like specifically speaking to that.
Yeah, I really like that, kind of being more direct with that question. That's one of the reasons, like, I added, oh, I went the wrong way. Oh, no, I didn't. Like this question that I added, like describe how your project will deliver equitable outcomes. I added that because I wanted like a more direct question that they could just answer. And so I would love what you're trying to get out there. I would love to have a more direct question on that, which maybe I can kind of, maybe I can work with you. I can kind of try to come up with something, and then I can send you some ideas that you can help me wordsmith if you'd be open to that.
Of course I would, because this was even a challenge that we had with the CalVIP grants, was that, when people were describing what their outcomes were going to be, it was after they were awarded the grant. And a lot of times these entities weren't even formed until the grant was awarded to them. So they weren't in the community to be able to relate to them, to be able to get them to come to these listening sessions, to be able to get them to fill out the evaluations. They didn't have that, that hold within the community already. And I think that that's really the important piece before we even start thinking about what traffic safety pieces are we going to be putting in, what implementation devices are we going to be using. We need to have community there saying, this is what we need. This is the problems that we're seeing.
Great. Yeah, I will follow up with you on this. Martha.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I just have to really just piggyback on Polani's suggestion. I have to piggyback on Polani's suggestion because I think that that's really the problem. People get funded and we kind of all see people jump on the bandwagon because they're able to organize or mobilize, and they really don't have a true connection with the community. And so, yes, it's important to be able to see what are they currently doing? What are some of the tangible outcomes that they've had already, successes? Even if they had failures, I would want to know that they were at least intentional in their approaches, and what remediations have they created to make this round a better outcome for their community. And the idea of working with other organizations is really important, but it's also important to show that these organizations that they've been working with are organizations that have actually been a benefit to the community, because in these spaces, sometimes we have allies that are not necessarily good allies. They're more economic versus environmental and health, as the forefront for their outcomes. And that's really important to understand that everything that's green is not always good. It might bring economic flow, but we need to be really careful of what groups we're really supporting. And I wanted to laud you on the idea of having those two other points that you added. Those are very, very important things right now in our communities. Community benefits analysis is critical, but not to just surface, that participation, but really show that what kind of positive outcomes are going to be created by working through this project. What are the real take homes that would not have happened had not this project come into fruition? And that's really where we get to see some of that magic work, and see people actually see the growth of how engagement has shifted. Because in a lot of these projects, people are already feeling they're going to be under attack or under represented, or they're not going to be able to see something great. It's just going to be another kind of imposition of infrastructure. But when we actually say it, because of this, there's going to be, as a result of this, we're going to have another park, or we're going to have another space for opportunity for people to kind of just even rest, or something positive that comes out of this. It's important that the community is able to kind of voice out what they'd like to see if this does happen.
Great. Thanks, Martha. Michelle. Um, Michelle, if you're talking, you're muted. I'm so sorry. Mm, Okay. Well, I can't hear Michelle, but I will go to Howard, and then Michelle will come back to you momentarily to see if we can hear you. So Howard.
Okay, Howard here. I think it would help me if you took a little bit of a step back and kind of explain to me or others who normally applies for these funding, uh, and
Yeah.
who's eligible to apply, who normally applies, and what does a application look like? Give us an example of a fictitious application and what it looks like and what they would have to demonstrate in terms of community engagement and other criteria.
Yeah, that's a great question, Howard. So it's a little bit different for all three of the programs. So for the local partnership program, um, that program again is to be eligible for that program, you have to have a locally imposed fee or tax for transportation improvements. So the applicants for that program tend to be on the smaller side compared to kind of who's applying to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program or to the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. So that program sees a lot of like cities and counties applying for projects. And also Matthew is on, and he can correct me with any of this because the local partnership program and the Solutions for Congested Corridors program are not my programs. For the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, so for that program, the eligible applicants include county transportation agencies, regional transportation planning agencies, and Caltrans. So the kind of scale of who's applying for that program is a little bit bigger than who's applying for the local partnership program. It tends to be bigger agencies with kind of like a bigger like picture of the projects they're trying to plan and implement. And then for the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, so for TSEP, there are many eligible applicants. So as I mentioned, Caltrans statutorily receives 40% of the funds through a competitive process. So we have Caltrans as an applicant, and they usually, I would say 90% of the time, are partnering with a local or regional agency. So we also have regional agencies like metropolitan planning organizations and regional transportation planning agencies. So again, like kind of bigger scale, like looking at the region as a whole. And then we also, local agencies are eligible for a TSEP. So cities and counties can also apply. We also get for TSEP applications from ports and port authorities. So we get applications every cycle from the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles. And we fund that can be like maritime ports. We also get projects that are land ports or land port of entries. And then for TSEP, uniquely, private entities, so basically companies, can also apply for zero emission vehicle infrastructure projects, but they have to partner with a public agency. So they can partner with Caltrans or a local or regional agency if they'd like to apply. So yeah, it's a little bit different across all three programs. In terms of what the applications look like, that's also a great question. So all three programs have different evaluation criteria. So applicants there's always like a fact sheet that tells you about the project. There's like background information like the scope and the location. A lot of times applicants will include like the history of the project, like when it was first thought of. And then we kind of go into the evaluation criteria. So it's a little bit different for each program. I'm just going to give you an example from TSEP because that's what I'm most familiar with because that's my program. So in TSEP, we have, out of all three programs, we have the most evaluation criteria. So we evaluate on what we call freight system factors. So that's freight throughputs, velocity, and reliability. So we're looking at how are you moving more cargo through the freight system? How are you moving that cargo faster? And how are you making the transport of that cargo more reliable? Then we also evaluate on what we call transportation system factors. So that includes safety, and that includes when we talk about for all of these transportation system factors, it's freight-based, but it's also like the general transportation system. So all users of the roadway. So safety, um, congestion relief, um, bottleneck relief, multimodal strategies, and interregional benefits, like interregional freight benefits. And then we also evaluate on what we call community impact factors. So for that, it's air quality impacts, economic and workforce development impacts, and community engagement. And that's where this piece fits in. In terms of like how community engagement is kind of factored in overall, we don't weight our criteria like in a, there's no like actual like weighting system. Like we kind of look at everything holistically, like how is your like entire project, like what are the benefits of your project as a whole? And I would say like community engagement piece is a huge factor in what we end up recommending for funding. So we look at that piece as kind of like the like overall, like it's providing all these benefits, like what was their community engagement like and how did they, incorporate that feedback into the project? And that can kind of make our final determination of whether or not we would recommend that project for funding. The community engagement criteria that I just showed you, like the stuff that was in black on the screen, that's our existing criteria. The red was our proposed new criteria. We worked over several cycles to kind of build this out, which is why there's already kind of a lot there, but we know we want to keep improving it and keep kind of filling the gaps of what we're missing. I think I answered your question, but I may have missed like a sub question that you had. So please let me know if there's anything you need clarification on.
Yeah, that was very helpful and that was very good. Uh, so it seems that the cities and counties and transportation authorities, regional transportation agencies, and all the planners and all the people involved in development of these applications are pretty well versed in community engagement. So that's the good thing. So it seems that there are obviously experts and staff people in city and county governments, transportation authorities, regional transportation agencies, and other like groups that are devoted to creating and developing writing for grants and funding. So they are very well aware of the criteria. And the good thing is then they're encouraged, obviously, to create more community engagement and document it and have the criteria that will you know, help them be successful in gaining funding. So that's a good thing that it's almost kind of a self you know in reinforcing having more and more community engagement. I see that in San Francisco definitely and the Bay Area. So I guess the question would be, is it fair, are the bigger agencies kind of have an advantage because they have, a lot of staff and expertise to craft these, you know, applications.
Okay, so I would say like in terms of like the community engagement that we see in the applications, it actually kind of varies like pretty like we have some agencies who are really on top of community engagement. Like they are just doing this fabulous community engagement. Um like yeah. And then we also have like some agencies that are smaller or just the type of project they are proposing they like maybe in the past like didn't have to really do that much community engagement for it, so they're surprised that we're asking for so much from them. So it really varies like across the different agencies about like kind of the expertise level, and that's one of the reasons we have our equity supplement, is to kind of provide some more technical assistance to those agencies that are a little bit more behind. In terms of like if some people have more of an advantage, if they have more experience, and like I'm thinking of like the Bay Area, where I feel like a lot of times we get applications that have like stronger community engagement from the Bay Area. Um, I would say that like okay, so you definitely, if you've conducted strong community engagement, you definitely have an advantage in the programs, because like that will help you kind of, get over like the threshold of what you need to get funded in the programs. But I also think a lot of agencies, I'm not, it doesn't, even if you did excellent community engagement, I think a lot of agencies are still learning how to convey that into writing and into the application, and to really tell the story of that engagement. And that's one of the reasons, another reason for our equity supplement is to really get them thinking about like what types of things should you be doing and you should be talking about. Um, like just as an example, they'll say like, oh yeah, the scope, the workshops like influence the scope of the project. We like included like active transportation elements because of this workshop. And I'm like, that's great, but like, what was the actual feedback from the community? Like, did they say they wanted active transportation elements? Did they say they wanted a safer place to walk? Like, they're not, they still are like getting used to like providing us with the level of detail we want to know, to like really know like that the scope was like really driven by the community. So I think like we're still working with them on that, and I think a lot of agencies still have kind of room to improve on their community engagement, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you, to like what kind of questions we should be asking them, and then also like what kind of resources can we be providing with that for them too. So maybe like for our equity supplement, maybe like this cycle, they're only able to demonstrate like a few of the equity benefits we list. But like, if we keep showing this to them and like encouraging them to use it, maybe next cycle they'll be able to like they'll be submitting projects that are stronger and that have like more equitable outcomes than they did previously. Like it's kind of like
Yeah.
a messaging thing for our programs, where we're like, these are the types of projects that we really want to be seeing.
Mm. Yeah, I like that part of it. I think as you just said, it reinforces what is desirable to do. And I think you see that more and more in applications people learn. Fortunately, I think sometimes people hire consultants now to help write these. So, but I think the good thing is that to kind of continue to reinforce, and I think it might be helpful to create a kind of a checklist of these are the things that, other cities and applicants have done. And you might consider, community workshops or, listening sessions or, meeting with community, kind of list what other successful applicants have done so that give people an idea, what they could do.
We have some of those examples in our equity supplement, but we're always looking for more. And also, like, if there's a way we can better, like, show those examples, or like when applicants are reading the community engagement criteria, like making sure we're referring to them to those examples, maybe through like a direct link, like they can click on it and it goes down to that section of the guidelines. That may be really, really helpful. Because that's another worry that I have, is that we have this like great resource, and I'm like, hopefully they're scrolling all the way down to actually read the resource. Um, I wish I could force them, but I think we could maybe do more to like link directly to it. Okay. We'll hop back to Michelle. Sorry I couldn't hear you before, Michelle.
Sorry. Yeah, I got pulled away a couple times. Sorry, guys. Um, I'm wondering if with the criteria of um, within the community and the questions, the disadvantaged communities leaves it really open to interpretation a little bit. Is there wording in that and part of that question that includes a diverse group of people within that definition?
So our equity supplement does include like a definition of like who, it's obviously not all inclusive, but it's like examples of who we would consider disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized. Maybe we take some of that language from the equity supplement, and we also put it kind of at the like in the community engagement criteria, so people kind of know who we're talking about. Like, does that? Do you think that would be helpful, Michelle?
Yeah, I would. Sorry, I'm outside today.
That's okay. Okay, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Andres.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I, I I was thinking of some of the criteria, and it's bouncing off of what was mentioned earlier in terms of the level of engagement with communities, right? I think identifying levels where the community are engaged is going to be important. So from concept to planning to design and ultimately construction, what are the ways in which stakeholders are being engaged on particular projects? I think it may be even helpful to define, I don't know, a mile radius of communities as being engaged by a particular project. So that I think that's important because like has been mentioned, right? People will agencies, especially in my experience, right, want to approach this in a very checkbox kind of a thing. Oh, we engage people. There were, a broad definition of what a stakeholder is, right? So I think as long as there's parameters that we're looking for, or that we make clear that these are what's being graded, it'll help improve people to be more thoughtful. And then the other question I had is around budget requirements around engagement. Is there a minimum or anything like that? Because I think that's an important piece of it, right? Because one of the things that I've experienced in the past with agencies is they really provide or pro what's it called, dedicate minimal amount of their budgets towards this engagement process, and then it impacts how well they engage people.
Sorry, if you hear me typing, it's because I'm taking notes. Okay, so first of all, I love that you said like what phases or stages of the project were they engaged, and I think like in our community engagement evaluation criteria, we could like make that clear. Like we want them to kind of address, were they involved in the concept? Were they involved in planning or design? Like I think I can go back and like make some adjustments to the language to kind of be so like our applicants are kind of reading that language and they're like, okay, these are the things that we did to engage the community when we were kind of conceiving the project, planning the project, and then designing the project. So I will go back and work on that. I love that suggestion. I love being like more specific. Okay, and then budget requirements. So we don't have any budget requirements around engagement. And I think our thought is a lot of times our applicants have like varying, well, we hear from a lot of them that they usually have like limited resources because they're public agencies. I don't know, Matthew, sorry to phone a friend, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that question.
Sorry, Beverly. Specifically, what did you want me to weigh in on
That's
as your phone a
sorry.
friend?
Sorry to call you out, Matthew. Okay, so
No,
Andres.
no, because I've been thinking about something Howard said, but I wanted to get through all of our subcommittee members before I chimed in.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Andres was saying that a lot of times he'll see that communities or agencies are kind of dedicating the minimum amount of their budget for community engagement. And he was wondering if we had like budget requirements around engagement, like how much they should be
Well,
dedicating to it, which obviously we
okay.
don't, but I don't know if this has come up before and you wanted to address it.
No, so yes, I did catch that I think earlier in Andre's question. So that is a good question. And the reason that we don't set requirements or thresholds, if you will, and I think this kind of came up a little bit during Howard's comments around the size of agencies that we're working with. Obviously, if it's MTC, which is one of the largest metropolitan planning organizations in the state of California, they have vast resources. I'm sure that they're committing to various levels of engagement through the multiple communities and demographics that reside in the 9 Bay Area counties. Also, when we have thought about these thresholds for the types of resources that could be imposed, the commission has to be very careful in creating thresholds simply because the funding that we actually are overseeing, so the transportation funding that Beverly's been talking about, that flows through the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Local Partnership Program, cannot contribute to operations. Meaning, if we were to say applicants have to, commit a certain percentage of their, planning budget or so on and so forth, they could turn around and say, well, is the commission able to provide funding for those types of activities? In the funding that flows through our programs is only for capital improvements, or for pre-construction activities directly tied to capital improvements. So therefore, because we can't contribute SB1 funding to, respective teams or staff across the state building out their community engagement strategies, we also cannot ask that they have already created or built that into their respective budgets at a certain monetary threshold. It's also, maybe to answer this in a different way, and this is what Howard had brought up in terms of larger agencies having better responses or better ability to contribute to community engagement. When we created the Transportation Equity Supplement for the SB1 programs 2 cycles ago, the idea was that we could create a resource that has been informed through our own equity and engagement team here at the CTC, as well as resources that Caltrans has been able to put together or identify, as well as our equity advisory committee members suggesting resources they're aware of or best practices. So the best way of us trying to even the playing field, so to speak, is by developing what we feel is a pretty solid list of resources and strategies around community engagement to hopefully, I don't want to say teach some of the agencies that don't already have these engagement strategies integrated into the way they do business. But really, we're kind of hoping and expecting that that's what they started doing. And not to go back to the comments I was thinking when I heard Howard asking his question, but I've been with the SB1 programs since SB1 was created 9 years ago, and we didn't evaluate community engagement in cycle 2 of the SB1 programs. We started evaluating it in cycle 3, and in cycle 4, we could already tell that the same applicants that were not committing any resources outside of maybe the EIR process to engage community members were really taking it upon themselves already to make sure that they had tangible strategies and tangible engagement so that they could reflect that in their SB1 transportation applications. Meaning, I don't want to call Peggy Martinez out, EAC member Peggy Martinez, because I know she's not here currently on this subcommittee meeting, but she volunteered to evaluate applications in cycle 3 and then again in cycle 4, and a lot of the feedback she provided after she evaluated in cycle 4 were, wow, you can really tell that responses and activities became more robust from cycle 3 to cycle 4. And that's truly one of the reasons we ask our EAC members to partner with us at the CTC staff to evaluate this criteria, because you have helped us inform these policies and the guidelines process, and then it gives you an opportunity to come back and see what the applicants are actually providing. And to answer your question in a different way, Andres, honestly, if we have applicants that don't have the resources to engage their communities in any robust fashion, we do believe that the guidelines and the criteria currently allow them to explain what they're able to do. And as long as they're able to, demonstrate within their means, they've shown an effort. I think that this isn't a black and white process. We're not going to compare what the Bay Area or what Southern California, LA Metro are able to do compared to what a very small county, Nevada County has been successful in our TSEP program. But we need to see at least where you come from the state, that you're demonstrating a level of commitment and a strategy that has offered that your project outcome would be reflective of benefits that your community has communicated to you in some fashion. So I think I kind of talked all around your question, and I apologize for that, but I had a lot of thoughts on what we've heard so far. So I do appreciate this line of questions, and Beverly, I'll turn it back to you.
Matthew. Okay, Martha.
Along that same engagement playbook, right? And I was told that it was more for in-house, and that kind of like made me a little bit sad, because I know it's important to have that in-house purview, but it's also important to let the community know that you have this strategy, so to speak, that you're looking at. And I think that it'd warrant having some type of a playbook for applicants. These are the things that we're looking for. These are the innovative thinking. Do you think out of the box? And I think that they should show things like charrette, pop-ups. Are you providing outreach in places where normal outreach doesn't occur? Are you doing it outside of hours that traditionally folks have had these meetings? Are you doing more than just newspaper, or just what kind of mediums are you using? And that matrix or that template will give you a better picture of what they're really looking at as far as their community engagement. And the other part is like in the ATP grants, we have like small, medium, and large projects, and how can we better serve those applicants that are applying that don't have that same type of opportunity or mobility, to give them just as equal an opportunity to apply and be able to get some of the fruit, off the table. And then the other is, when we're looking at community engagement, I always get so ticked when we have jurisdictions hire a consultant organization and they don't tandem with a community org. I think it's almost critical for us to have that written in, that if you want to pay all this money for and include this money for your consultants, but we should have some type of connection where if you're going to work with the consultant team, that your community engagement portion should show some type of collaboration with organizations. And that will allow for better engagement. Like one of the things that, like you said, you can't provide money for food. You're talking about infrastructure and the design. But oftentimes, in order to have real, true community engagement, you have to have those components, having it during hours, sometimes that are outside of the hours of work, having food available for those folks that are coming in, and hours that are suitable for real, true engagement. And it can be done. I mean, I'm seeing it more and more in different local tags and different transportation groups that are actually incorporating small organizations and giving them the money to do the community outreach and getting the information back to the consultants, so they're really getting a true grassroots, perspective, and not just what, oh, we went to this area and this is what we got. Because just the other day I was on another call for our other committee group, and their demographics were all on affluent communities, and none of the data was relative to the actual people that needed the resources the most. So, I mean, I guess just really being intentional and looking at how they're communicating, who they're communicating, and before they actually do a report, does it meet the criteria that we're asking for? Because if it doesn't, then why they shouldn't just feel comfortable to turn in an application that is not really representative of the people that they're serving.
So in terms of like a playbook for applicants, that's kind of how we see our supplement. We have like lots of lists for like different engagement strategies they could use and examples. Yeah, now that you say that, I'm wondering if we could come up with like some sort of like item to complement that, like some kind of worksheet they can use. So anyways, you got me thinking about like different ways that we can kind of display that information and share that information with our applicants. So thank you. Okay, I am gonna move on to the equity supplement since we've discussed it a little bit. But before I do that, I want to do a quick time check with Camille just to see, because it'll kind of change whether I present all this at once, then go for a discussion, or if we kind of have a one-by-one discussion of each topic. So Camille, how much time do I have left?
Technically, the subcommittee, the Zoom hold is until 4 p.m. So we have about 30 minutes left, and we usually take 5-10 minutes at the end for next steps. So I'd say, yeah, roughly 20-30 minutes.
Okay, so what I'll do is, because that was a very robust discussion of the community engagement piece, and I'm really grateful because I wrote down a lot of ideas already, so I'm excited to go back and look at these. So what I'll do is I'll present all of the equity supplement. You'll see like the discussion slides, but after I present all of the equity supplement, I'll open it up for discussion, and then we can spend like the rest of the time discussing whatever pieces of the equity supplement the group wants to discuss. Hopefully that works for everyone. I just want to make sure I kind of am able to show you all the content, and then we can, whatever piece really like strikes the group as interesting, we can focus on those pieces. Okay, so equity supplements. One second. Okay, so the SB1 Transportation Equity Supplement was developed for our third program cycle in collaboration with the Equity Advisory Roundtable. It's supposed to be or intended to be a practical resource to help applicants demonstrate effective community engagement and equitable outcomes. So kind of it provides lots of different examples and guidance on a few things. So it includes example indicators to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. It also includes examples of effective and inclusive engagement strategies. So kind of different types of strategies that applicants can take and how they can be most effective in doing this. It also includes examples of equitable project outcomes. It also includes links to anti-displacement resources, so ways that applicants can strengthen their local anti-displacement strategies. And then this cycle, we are proposing to add a new section to the supplement, and that's tribal engagement resources. Okay. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry. There we go. Okay, and also, so last cycle we worked really closely with the EAC and some subject matter experts to expand on the supplement and improve these resources and examples, and we really just want to continue improving them. So in terms of the example indicators to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities, so this section kind of lays out the different tools that applicants can choose from to identify communities. We like to have several different options for our applicants because of the diverse context of California communities. And so just the examples that we have in the supplement include the Caltrans Transportation Equity Index. So that tool kind of looks at the populations most burdened by transportation and the populations that also receive the fewest benefits. And that office did a great presentation on our last workshop as well at Caltrans. CalEnviroscreen, which measures pollution burden, health concerns, and socioeconomic conditions. The Healthy Places Index, which measures community health and opportunities. Unfortunately, we used to have the USDOT Equitable Transportation Community Explorer, but unfortunately that was removed from the federal government's website in January 2025. And I say unfortunately because I really, really liked that tool that had a lot of really useful indicators, including historical redlining of communities, which is a hard thing to find in some of the existing tools. We also have federally recognized tribes and projects benefiting California Native American tribes. So tribes that aren't federally recognized are also considered one of these communities. Median household income, so measuring economic disadvantage. And then we also allow regional definitions. So equity priority communities and communities of concern are two examples from different regions. Regional definitions must be adopted as part of a regional transportation plan or a sustainable communities plan or a sustainable communities strategy. And then applicants can also submit documentation to demonstrate benefits to communities that aren't necessarily identified with these tools. So some examples of data that they might provide, like data that shows that there's a significant portion of immigrants or seniors or individuals with disabilities or unhoused individuals or formerly incarcerated individuals or households without cars. And as I mentioned, we will come back and discuss everything together momentarily. So, example equity benefits. So this section of the equity supplement includes different examples of equitable outcomes for projects. And I actually, there's revised the language slightly since I finalized this PowerPoint, and also I just realized that there is a typo right here, language. So when I will read these and I will let you know where we also have additional new language that we're proposing. So the first is increase access to social, educational, and economic opportunities and amenities, including shopping centers, health centers, schools, community organizations, museums, social services, transit centers, employment sites, and then we have a couple new examples here that we'd like to add, including parks and open space. And then reduce travel times and congestion. And then our proposed new language here is especially in the long term. Reduce pollution, improve access to active transportation and provide alternatives to automotive options. Improve the safety of active transportation and non-motorized modes of travel in the community and the corridor. Enhance opportunities to increase physical activity by encouraging the use of active transportation. Enhance opportunities to encourage the use of zero-emission modes of travel. Increase access to accessible facilities and infrastructure with first and last mile connectivity to accommodate all types of travelers, especially mobility impaired users, And then one bullet that's not on here that we are proposing to add is incorporate community or tribal art into project elements. And then, as I mentioned, we will come back and discuss this momentarily. Okay, so this is our entire section on, there's 2 slides here on example engagement and inclusion strategies. And as you can see, they are quite lengthy, like each of the examples. And I don't necessarily want to read them all because there's many of them. There's another slide that has lots of examples. So I will, trying to think of the best way to do this. I'll summarize each of these examples, and then we can go back and look at any of them more closely if anyone wants to discuss any of them more. So the first is identify, contact, engage, and include the perspectives of disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups. Public outreach should include traditional forms of communication, including phone calls, mailers, flyers, and in-person events. So because some communities may lack access to computers. And then resources should be provided in multiple languages and formats based on community needs. So develop relationships with community-based leaders, groups, or organizations, such as environmental justice groups, religious or spiritual leaders, well-known individual advocates, and community organizers, local bike and pedestrian advocacy groups, public school leadership. There's lots of other examples here. Collaborate with community-based groups and organizations to establish a local or regional project study area organization or committee. Develop a community benefits agreement with a project study area community to strengthen incentives for good faith community engagement and deliver targeted benefits. Demonstrate how community-identified and community-driven perspectives were solicited and included or integrated into the project purpose or scope. Survey and collect information on non-motorized travel demands and unmet mobility needs of disadvantaged and historically impacted and marginalized groups. Develop relationships and conduct meaningful engagement with tribal governments and incorporate their feedback into the project. Collaborate, fund, or contract with local organizations to support community engagement efforts. Prioritize community-identified high-need areas, such as those identified through robust community engagement. Prioritize contracting strategies that benefit disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups. Ensure stability in neighborhoods and communities through the successful implementation of short-term and long-term anti-displacement strategies. Those are our examples. I didn't read them in full, but these are just the example strategies we have, and we would love inputs on additional strategies that we should include. And I think Martha was talking about, like, the equity supplement isn't specific, but I think we could add something about like food and time of day, like those kinds of things in here to help remind our applicants that more effective engagement could include those types of things. And Pualani.
And with these questions, Beverly, just like before, I think that this is true with all grants, not just these transportation grants, but a lot of times when they fill out this portion of the grant application, they are just describing what their outreach looks like, right? Not actually the amount of people in the community that they are dealing with. What are the other community-based organizations that they're working with, right? And really kind of talking about that real fabric that's bringing people to the meeting, that's getting people to actually put input into the meetings. And from what I've experienced is that it's because a lot of times when these meetings are put out there, these meetings are to tell the community what they are going to put in. we're having this meeting because we are going to put this into your community. And really, if we want successful infrastructure, it has to be the complete opposite, right? We have to have the community there, to have the community tell us what it is that they want, to have the community tell us what problems are they experiencing. A lot of times when I help communities to advocate for themselves, and we go to these different municipalities, the municipalities will specifically say, do not tell us what you want. We're going to come back and tell us what we can give to you, right? And so I think it's really, really important that we do the work to switch that around, because if we don't, people have no idea how velocity interacts with crashes. People have no idea why roundabouts are safer. People, right? They don't know. We have to take the time to educate them on these different pieces of infrastructure so that they understand why we're putting them in, so that they don't just see that we're just throwing green paint on the ground, right? Why are we doing separated bike lanes? Why are we slowing down the speed limits? How does that, and it's impacting me. I feel like I've had more traffic. Why are you doing this? Right. And so being able to provide that education to them and then them tell us what it is that they need and want.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to get from applicants is like, it's like whenever I'm reviewing an application, I'm like, okay, but like how, like who came up with this idea and like how did you actually, it's like, tell us like how you got this idea. Was it from the community? They're just not being specific enough. So with these different strategies and examples, we're trying to get that information from them. But yeah, if there's like different wording changes that we should use or different other questions that we should be asking them. And I don't, again, like I can go back and like look based on this feedback, but if you have any other ideas, you're very welcome to like follow up with me because I know you probably need some time to digest this information. So, but yeah, like if you have more ideas and how we can kind of like center that perspective, that I would really appreciate that. Um, okay. Oh, Howard.
Well, generally, the great thing about these examples is that as you were saying, each generation of applications will get better and better because it becomes very obvious that community engagement, caring about your marginalized, underserved communities is very, very critical to the application. And so generally the message becomes ingrained in cities and counties and agencies. So that's the good thing. I think the generally, it's important when you present this huge, fairly large amount of information that there be more organization of the messages. So if it's possible to organize it in a way that's more logical and have more headers and subheaders so that each sentence might begin with one word or two or three words so that generally you kind of get the message quickly and then you read the rest of the sentence or paragraph. So that would, I think, would really help.
Yeah, I can go back and maybe that section, that especially that engagement strategy section, I feel like it's a big like list for people to look at. Maybe I could break it up into different subsections, like kind of categorize the different types of engagement strategies, and maybe that'll help people kind of go through the list. I think that's a great idea. Um, Something else you said made me think of something, but oh, okay. One thing I just wanted to bring up, unrelated to this presentation, but Howard kind of brought it up. So, as program managers, we have debriefs with our applicants after we like do our staff recommendations and the projects are funded. And I will say I did many, many debriefs this cycle, and now we're doing our technical assistance office hours. And I would say like probably the number one topic that I've discussed with everyone is their community engagement. Like, how can they strengthen it? Like, what kind of things we want to like hear from them? Like, what kind of detail should they be providing? What kind of engagement should they be doing? And like, one thing we always tell them is like, we want, like Pulani was just saying, like, we want to know how the community actually like helps you develop this project. We want to know like from the beginning until now, like how they were involved, what was their specific feedback. So I do think it's going to take more time, but I do think that like I know Naveen and Lashara are doing the same thing with their debriefs. I think like we are continuing to give all of the applicants this message of like this is the type of thing that we want to see. And I think eventually it'll get through to everyone. It's just there's a lot of applicants, um but yeah, so we're very committed to it.
Also, are all the successful applications public record? Can people look at past successful applications and see?
Yes, they're all public record. Yes.
Okay.
Michelle.
Yeah, for those of us who actually work on the projects, a debrief for us closer to the time that we did the applications would be helpful for me because we waited quite a few months to get me debriefed, and um some of that of what I worked on got lost in time. So it's helpful for me if within a month or less that I get debriefed after working on the projects. Thank you.
Michelle, are you talking about the like when we did evaluator debriefs with you?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's really good feedback. I think that we could I think our intent was to do them sooner. We were just so busy, but I think if we like plan a little bit better this cycle, we can do them earlier.
Beverly, we'll commit to that right now, Michelle. I think the delay from when our EAC members supported the evaluation efforts to when we debriefed with you was just tied to logistics, but we hear you loud and clear. We'll make sure that we can conduct those within 30 days of closing that process out in cycle 5.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. And apologies for that wait. I was thinking about that when we were having debriefs with our evaluators. I was like, I hope they remember because we waited a while to have these, but everyone provided great feedback on that as well. Okay. So the next section is the anti-displacement resources. So these are links to different resources to help applicants develop stronger anti-displacement strategies. I'm not going to read through these for time, but if you have other ideas of what we can add here, you can mention them now, or you can email me other resources you know of. And then the final section, before we have kind of our final discussion, is the tribal engagement resources section. So this is a new section that we wanted to add, and I think like we're really open to feedback on this section. We worked with Bridget Driller, our tribal liaison, on this language. Unfortunately, Bridget couldn't be here today, but we're trying to build this out more with different resources that applicants can use to more effectively engage with tribes. So I will read the language and the different resources we've currently included. Assembly Bill 52, Gatto, Chapter 532, Statutes of 2014, requires public agencies to consult with California Native American tribes, federally and non-federally recognized, during the California Environmental Quality Act process for projects that may affect tribal cultural resources. California embraces meaningful consultation and collaboration with tribal nations. Agencies are encouraged to develop relationships and conduct meaningful engagement with tribal governments and incorporate their feedback into project planning and implementation. Resources include the Governor's Office of Tribal Affairs. So that website, which I've added language here since I worked on these slides to kind of explain what each one was. So that one includes training, reports, and other resources related to tribal engagement, tribal cultures, California Native American tribe history, and more. Caltrans Tribal Relations. So this is the Caltrans Tribal Relations Office webpage, which includes links to California Native American land maps and contact lists, as well as a link to Assembly Bill 52, which includes all of the statutory requirements for public agency tribal consultation. All right, so for all of that, I know that was a lot of information, but I wanted to make sure I got through all of it. So, like anything that like you think we should add to, for example, for the indicators, is there anything missing from that list? Do you know of a tool that we should look into, or a population that maybe isn't identified by any of those tools? For the equitable project benefits examples, are those examples like comprehensive? Are there kind of equity benefits that we're missing on that list? For the engagement strategies, we already heard some feedback on that. So are there like other engagement strategies we should include, or are there any that we should modify? And then for displacement, any other resources? And then for tribal resources, like any other tribal resources or more language we should add to this area. And then overall, like I kind of showed you all of the different sections of the equity supplement of the different resources we provide. So are there any gaps in that? Are there other types of examples or resources that we should consider adding? I know those are a lot of questions, but I'll just see, like, I'm sure people have reactions to what I just presented. So we'll just kind of go with what everyone wants to talk about. I think we have, well, a couple minutes, and I don't want Camille to be mad at me, so we can wrap up soon. But any thoughts? Howard?
There are some categories that cross over many different uh, areas of, disadvantaged communities. For instance, the aging senior population is a growing part of our society, and that impacts, low-income peoples, homeless people, uh, ethnic minorities, LGBT. So how is aging and seniors uh, is it just included in other categories, or is there a, focus?
Yeah, so okay, so we use I know uh I know the SB1 team before I joined. I used to work before I joined the SB1 team, I worked on the active transportation team, and we incorporated language from the oh my gosh, I can't remember the name, but it was the Department of Aging. They have like a strategy for older adults. So we incorporated language from that into our guidelines, and I know the SB1 team did that too. So several of these examples, like the equity benefits, include language about seniors or older adults. And the engagement strategies as well. I would love to like strengthen any of those to like make sure that this like engagement strategies are relevant. And now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, for the example indicators, I'm not actually sure which ones actually factor in like seniors or older adults. But I know that applicants can like submit that as more extra data, being like, hey, these are like we have like a large like aging population. So I don't know, like if maybe we could look more closely at tools that maybe could identify those populations, or I can go back and look at each of the tools and see which ones already factor them in. But I think that's a population that we definitely are interested in strengthening the language around, as well as people with disabilities. That's something we also really want to strengthen the language around. Michelle.
I believe it's there already, but I might be wrong. I know the EAC, the first year I was on, which was a couple years ago, we're working on that criteria to make sure seniors and people with disabilities was in the language. So I believe it's there, but I might be wrong.
It
And if
is.
I
It definitely is. But it's like again, one of the reasons why I'm so glad that like you're helping with the subject matter expert reviews is because I would love to like just strengthen that language and make sure it's integrated like everywhere. So if we're missing it anywhere, um, I would just like love any suggestions you have. Anything else? Okay, well, I don't see any other hands. Make sure I'm not missing anyone. So I will hand it back over to Camille. But before I do that, I just want to say thank you all again so much for your input. I took a lot of notes, so I have a lot to think about over the next couple of days. I may follow up with some of you about your ideas. And also, if you think of anything else, please reach out to me at any time. I would love to hear from you. This was a lot to digest. So if you have dreams about this tonight and tomorrow you want to chat with me, just email me and we can get on another call and chat some more. I would just love to talk to any of you. And so, Camille, I will hand it back over to you. And I'm sorry I took so much time.
No, thank you so much, Beverly and Matthew, for your very insightful presentation and comments. Learned a lot. And thank you, members, for your feedback. So now moving into wrap up and next steps. So the Community Engagement Subcommittee will reconvene in June to continue community engagement work with Caltrans, CTC, and CalSTA. Few quick announcements. So if you're interested in reviewing the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Programs Grant, or TIRCIP, make sure you fill out the interest form by April 24th. That was sent to the committee members via email. So if you haven't received it or you want it bumped up to the top of your inbox, let staff know. Also, this morning an email was sent out to sign up for briefings to go over the agendas for the May business and executive meeting. So if you're interested in receiving a briefing, please fill that out. That's all the items we have for today. Oh, sorry. Justin, did we have public comment on the last item?
No, I didn't see any request to comment on the item.
Okay, thanks. So with that concludes the end of our meeting at 3:55. And we will see you all in June for the next subcommittee meeting and before for the May business and executive meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.